Cumulative friction. How small urban barriers reshape routes, habits, and participation. In previous episodes, we separately discussed affordances, behavior settings, and territoriality. Affordances helped us ask what a particular environment allows different people to do. Behavior settings showed how places, objects, roles, rules, and routines organize recurring patterns of action. Territoriality revealed how people claim, share, control, and defend space. Now we need to connect these encounters across an entire journey and examine what happens when difficulties do not occur only once. A curb requires lifting. A crossing requires waiting. A blocked sidewalk requires a detour. An unclear route requires attention. An inaccessible entrance requires assistance. Each difficulty may appear minor when examined separately, but people do not experience cities one obstacle at a time. They experience sequences. The effects accumulate. This episode examines cumulative friction, how repeated minor difficulties combine to reshape routes, habits, mobility choices, and participation in urban life. Imagine a parent leaving home with a child in a stroller. The destination is 1 kilometer away. On a map, the trip looks easy. The route is short. The terrain is mostly flat. There is a sidewalk almost everywhere. There are 2 marked crossings and a bus route along part of the way. The first problem appears outside the building. A car is parked across the sidewalk. There is technically enough space for a person to squeeze past, but not enough for the stroller. The parent looks behind, tilts the stroller off the curb, enters the carriageway, and returns to the sidewalk beyond the vehicle. At the next corner, the curb has no ramp. The parent pushes down on the handle, raises the front wheels, and lowers the stroller into the street. This is not impossible. It is simply one small lifting task. The pedestrian signal has just turned red. The parent waits while several vehicle phases run. There is no shade. The child becomes restless. When the signal finally changes, a turning driver enters the crossing. The parent stops, makes eye contact, and continues. Farther along, cafe furniture narrows the usable sidewalk. 2 people approaching from the opposite direction cannot pass beside the stroller, so somebody must step aside. At the bus stop, there is no reliable arrival information. The parent does not know whether the bus will come in 2 minutes or 20. When it arrives, the space near the door is occupied. Boarding requires lifting the stroller across a gap while other passengers wait. None of these events is dramatic. No barrier makes the journey absolutely impossible. The parent reaches the destination. From the standpoint of conventional transport data, the trip succeeded, but the person arrives late, tired, and already calculating the return journey. Next time, the parent may take a car, choose a different destination, wait until another adult is available, postpone the trip, or remain home. The city records none of these outcomes as evidence that the original journey failed. This is the central problem of cumulative friction. Urban systems are often evaluated component by component. Does the street contain a sidewalk? Does the intersection contain a marked crossing? Does the bus have an accessible door? Does the building contain a ramp? Each element may pass a separate inspection. Yet a journey is not made from separate inspections. It is made through a chain. If one link fails completely, the journey may fail. If many links work badly, the journey may still fail behaviorally, even when it remains technically possible. The term cumulative friction is not the name of one established theory created by a single scholar. It is an analytical synthesis. Transport economics has long used ideas such as travel impedance and generalized travel cost. Instead of treating distance alone as the price of movement, generalized cost can combine time, money, waiting, transfers, and other burdens into a common model. Accessibility research asks whether people can reach destinations and opportunities, not merely whether transport infrastructure exists. Disability research increasingly emphasizes the whole journey chain. An accessible bus does not produce an accessible journey if the passenger cannot reach the stop, obtain information, board reliably, make a transfer, or enter the final destination. Research on transport disadvantage and social exclusion examines what happens when mobility constraints reduce access to employment, education, healthcare, social relationships, and civic life. Environmental psychology and wayfinding research show that movement also requires attention, orientation, and continuous adjustment. The capabilities approach asks a deeper question. What is a person actually able to do and be given both available resources and the conditions that convert those resources into real opportunities? Cumulative friction connects these traditions behaviorally. We can define it as the combined physical, temporal, cognitive, attentional, sensory, social, financial, and institutional effort required to complete an activity across a sequence of encounters and over repeated journeys. The word friction is useful because it directs attention to resistance. Friction does not always stop movement. It makes movement require more force. A rough surface may still be traversable, but it requires more effort. An unclear sign may still permit navigation, but it requires more thought. An unreliable bus may still provide transport, but it requires more time and contingency planning. A hostile social environment may still allow presence, but it requires more vigilance and emotional regulation. This is why possibility alone is an inadequate standard. A city can make an action technically possible while transferring nearly all the work of making it possible to the user. Friction takes several forms. Physical friction is the most visible. It includes curbs, stairs, slopes, broken surfaces, narrow passages, heavy doors, missing lifts, long detours, and repeated lifting. These obstacles are rarely equal across bodies. A 2-centimeter surface change may be irrelevant to one pedestrian, irritating to someone pulling luggage, and decisive for a wheelchair user with small front casters. The same obstacle also changes with the situation. A stairway encountered while walking freely is not the same environment when someone is carrying shopping, using crutches, or holding a sleeping child. Temporal friction includes waiting, delay, indirect routes, missed connections, restricted opening hours, and schedules that do not coordinate. Transport planning often counts travel time, but time has a social structure. 10 minutes does not cost everyone equally. A person with flexible working hours may absorb a delay. A shift worker may lose wages. A caregiver may miss a school pickup. A patient may miss an appointment that took months to arrange. Waiting is also experienced differently depending on comfort, information, and control. 5 minutes in shade with a visible countdown is not the same as 5 minutes in heat without knowing when anything will happen. Uncertain time can cost more than measured time because it prevents planning. Cognitive friction arises when a journey requires interpretation, memory, and repeated decisions. Which bus goes where? Where is the entrance? Can the ticket be bought on board? Does this lane continue after the intersection? Which lift reaches the correct platform? Why does the sign use a destination name that differs from the map? Familiar users often stop noticing this work. They have learned the system. Visitors, children, people with cognitive disabilities, and anyone navigating under stress reveal how much hidden knowledge ordinary movement may require. Attentional friction is related but distinct. It concerns the continuous monitoring required to avoid danger or interruption. A parent walking beside fast traffic must watch the child, the sidewalk, driveways, turning vehicles, signals, and other pedestrians at the same time. A cyclist on an unprotected street monitors doors, potholes, buses, overtaking vehicles, and gaps in traffic. A wheelchair user on a blocked sidewalk may need to examine the carriageway before attempting a detour. This attention has an opportunity cost. Attention used to defend basic movement cannot be used for conversation and observation, play, memory, or simply thinking. The person arrives not only physically tired, but cognitively depleted. Sensory friction includes heat, glare, noise, pollution, vibration, crowding, strong smells, and inadequate lighting. These conditions may appear secondary in technical drawings because they are difficult to represent with a line and dimension. Behaviorally, they can determine whether a route feels tolerable. A street may be geometrically walkable and practically punishing at midday because it has no shade. A bus may be operationally available and unbearable because crowding, noise, and unpredictable contact produce sensory overload. Social friction includes harassment, conflict, unwanted attention, surveillance, stigma, and the need to justify one's presence or ask repeatedly for help. It also includes small negotiations that some users must perform more often than others. Please move the chair. Please lower the ramp. Please let me pass. Please do not park here. Please tell me when we reach my stop. Assistance can be generous and necessary. Dependence becomes friction when a person must repeatedly request what others receive automatically. Financial friction includes fares, transfer charges, parking charges, equipment costs, and the price of safer or more reliable alternatives. Small charges can accumulate across linked trips. Unpredictable charges can create more burden than transparent ones because the user must preserve a financial margin for uncertainty. Institutional friction appears when responsibilities are fragmented, information is inaccessible, complaint procedures are exhausting, or eligibility rules require repeated proof. A broken lift may belong to the station operator. The sidewalk belongs to the municipality. The bus stop belongs to another agency. Enforcement belongs to the police. The passenger experiences one failed journey, while institutions experience 4 unrelated files. Caregiving friction cuts across all these categories. Caregivers rarely make isolated trips from one origin to one destination. They chain activities: home to school to work to a shop to an older relative, then home. They may carry bags, coordinate several bodies, respond to changing needs, and work within deadlines set by institutions. A 5-minute delay at the first link can propagate across the day. Finally, uncertainty is a form of friction in its own right. Will the lift work? Will the curb be blocked again? Will the driver stop? Will there be room on the bus? Will the route be safe after dark? People do not make mobility choices only from average conditions. They consider the consequences of failure. A lift that works 9 times out of 10 may still make a route unusable for someone who cannot use the stairs on the 10th occasion. Reliability can matter more than average convenience. At this point, cumulative friction may sound like a long list of urban annoyances. But the important question is not how many categories we can name. It is what happens when they interact. Friction is not always additive. Suppose a broken sidewalk adds 2 minutes. A pedestrian signal adds 1 minute, and a missed bus adds 10 minutes. In a simple model, the journey has gained 13 minutes. Real life is less polite. The 2-minute detour may cause the missed bus. The missed bus may cause a late arrival. The late arrival may cancel an appointment. The total effect is not 13 minutes. It is the loss of the activity. One barrier can amplify another. Heat increases fatigue. Fatigue makes a slope harder. The difficult slope slows movement. Slower movement causes a missed crossing phase. The extra weight increases heat exposure. The burdens form a loop. One failure can also remove the workaround for another. A person may tolerate an inaccessible metro station because an accessible bus provides an alternative. If roadworks divert the bus, the original station barrier becomes decisive. A parent may manage a stairway when another adult is present. When traveling alone, the same stairway changes from difficult to unusable. This means cumulative friction can take at least 3 forms. First, burdens can add together. Second, burdens can compound, with each one increasing the cost of the next. Third, a journey can behave like a weakest link system, where one critical failure makes the entire chain unavailable. The user's reserves matter throughout this process. People travel with unequal reserves of time, strength, money, attention, confidence, local knowledge, and social support. The same obstacle consumes different proportions of those reserves. A 10-minute delay is minor when someone has an hour available and decisive when they have 3 minutes. A heavy door is manageable when someone is rested and painful after a long journey. An unclear transfer is solvable when a person has mobile data, language proficiency, and confidence asking strangers. It is more difficult without those resources. This is why standardized users produce misleading standards. The so-called average traveler tends to have 2 free hands: good balance, adequate vision, spare attention, local knowledge, enough money, and no urgent care responsibilities. A magnificent creature. Almost nobody has met one in the wild. People also have variable reserves within the same day. The morning journey and evening return are not symmetrical. A route that is manageable when someone is rested may become difficult after work, in pain, in darkness, or while carrying purchases. Accessibility is therefore dynamic. It changes with bodies, tasks, weather, time, companions, and accumulated fatigue. Cumulative friction also operates across time, not only within one trip. People remember difficulty. They remember where the sidewalk was blocked, where the driver failed to yield, where the lift did not work, and where they felt exposed. This memory changes later behavior before the next obstacle appears. Past friction becomes anticipated friction. A person may avoid a route on a day when every component would have worked because previous failures made the route untrustworthy. This is behaviorally rational. When the consequences of failure are high, people prefer options they can control, even when those options are more expensive or less efficient on average. The private car often benefits from this comparison. Driving has substantial friction: traffic, parking, cost, maintenance, and stress. But many of its burdens are familiar, private, and partly controllable. The driver can leave earlier, store objects, alter the route, and wait inside a protected space. Walking in public transport may be faster or cheaper under normal conditions, yet their failures can require public negotiation, physical exposure, or dependence on several institutions. Mode choice is therefore not simply a calculation of minutes and money. It is also a judgment about uncertainty, dignity, effort, and the ability to recover when something goes wrong. Repeated experience contributes to habit. Habit is often described as a personal tendency. People drive because they are accustomed to driving. That is true but incomplete. Habits develop in stable contexts. Repeated cues trigger responses that have worked before. If walking repeatedly involves interruption, vigilance, and negotiation, while driving offers a familiar sequence, the environment helps train the driving habit. If cycling requires a new route decision at every intersection, it remains cognitively demanding. If a protected network provides continuous and predictable guidance, the journey can become automatic. Continuity reduces the number of moments at which a person must reconsider the activity. Friction creates behavioral thresholds. Below a threshold, people compensate. They lift the stroller, leave earlier, memorize the unofficial route, carry the bicycle over the steps, avoid the busiest hour, ask a relative for help. Above a threshold, the behavior changes. The person chooses another route, mode, destination, or time, or the trip disappears. The threshold is not fixed. It depends on the value of the activity and the person's available reserves. Someone may tolerate enormous friction to reach essential medical care. The same person may abandon a social visit after a minor additional difficulty. Observed trips, therefore, do not reveal acceptable conditions. They reveal what people were willing or forced to endure for those particular activities. Adaptation can conceal system failure. Residents learn to cross before the signal because the legal phase is too short. Wheelchair users learn which streets to avoid. Parents carry children over barriers. Older passengers wait for a less crowded bus. Women alter routes and schedules to reduce exposure to harassment. Local knowledge makes movement possible, but it also absorbs the cost of bad design. Competence can make an environment look functional. The people most affected may vanish from observation altogether. A sidewalk appears adequate because wheelchair users have stopped using it. A square appears peaceful because teenagers are repeatedly moved away. An evening bus appears safe because people who feel threatened no longer ride it. A playground appears underused because children cannot reach it independently. Non-use is one of the most important outcomes of cumulative friction, and one of the hardest to see. Transport systems usually count completed movement. They count boardings, traffic volumes, journey times, and collisions. They rarely count the visit not made, the job not accepted, the clinic changed, the child not allowed to travel independently, or the person who stays home. This is where cumulative friction becomes a question of participation. Karen Lucas and other researchers working on transport-related social exclusion have shown why mobility cannot be separated from access to ordinary social life. Transport disadvantage matters because it can restrict access to work, education, services, relationships, and political participation. The endpoint is not merely slower movement. It is reduced capability to take part in society. The capabilities approach sharpens this point. Two people may receive the same formal resource and gain different real opportunities from it. Both may live the same distance from a bus stop. One can reach it, understand the information, wait safely, board independently, and tolerate the journey. The other cannot. Equal provision does not automatically produce equal capability. The same principle applies beyond disability. A park may be equally open by law, but unequally reachable. A public meeting may be free but scheduled when caregivers cannot attend. A school may be nearby but separated from homes by a road parents consider unsafe. The city distributes not only infrastructure, but conversion conditions, the circumstances through which formal resources become usable freedoms. There is another complication. Not all friction is bad. Cities deliberately create friction. A speed hump creates physical friction for driving. A narrow turning radius requires drivers to slow down. A bollard prevents direct vehicle passage. A pedestrian signal interrupts movement. A parking charge adds financial friction. A permit adds administrative friction. These interventions may protect safety, regulate scarce space, or prevent a powerful user from imposing risk on others. The aim is not to make every action effortless. That would be impossible. It would also be politically incoherent because actions conflict. Continuous fast driving makes crossing, lingering, and play more difficult. Effortless curbside parking can create detours for pedestrians and delays for buses. Easy commercial occupation of a sidewalk can make wheelchair passage impossible. Removing friction for one action often transfers it to another person. The relevant questions are, which actions does the city make continuous? Which actions does it interrupt? Who absorbs the additional time, effort, uncertainty, and risk? What public purpose justifies that distribution? And are burdens assigned to those most capable of absorbing them, or to those with the fewest reserves? A city with smooth carriageways and broken sidewalks has not eliminated friction. It has allocated maintenance priority, a junction that gives drivers a long continuous phase and pedestrians a short crossing window has not eliminated delay. It has distributed waiting. A street that permits free parking while forcing bus passengers to stand in traffic has not avoided cost. It has socialized the cost of private storage. Friction is therefore a political distribution, not merely a technical defect. How can cumulative friction be researched? The first requirement is to study whole journeys. Auditing one ramp, vehicle, or intersection is insufficient. Researchers should follow the chain from origin to destination and, importantly, back again. The return journey may occur under different conditions: darkness, fatigue, heavier loads, reduced service, and stricter deadlines. The second method is accompanied travel, or the walk-along interview. Move with participants and ask what they notice, anticipate, and avoid. Record stops, scans, hesitations, lifts, requests for help, route changes, and moments of uncertainty. Do not assume that a smooth-looking movement required little effort. Familiar users may perform complex adaptations almost invisibly. The third method is friction mapping. Map not only barriers, but the work required at each point. Physical effort, waiting time, number of decisions, need for assistance, exposure to traffic, heat, or harassment, reliability of the component, availability of a fallback. The fourth method is journey diaries. Ask participants to record attempted trips, completed trips, altered trips, and abandoned trips. Include why a destination or time was changed. This begins to reveal demand suppressed before it becomes visible in movement counts. The fifth method is sequence analysis. Record the order of events, not merely their frequency. The same 5-minute delay has different consequences before and after a missed connection. A broken lift matters differently when discovered at the beginning of a trip and after the traveler has already completed most of it. Sequence reveals propagation. The sixth method is reliability analysis. Do not ask only whether a component exists. Ask how often it works, when it fails, how failure is communicated, and what alternative remains. An accessibility feature that fails unpredictably may provide less real capability than a less convenient but dependable option. The seventh method is reserve-sensitive comparison. Study the same route with different bodies, responsibilities, time budgets, and levels of familiarity. Compare traveling alone with accompanying a child, daylight with darkness, good weather with rain or heat, an outbound trip with the return, but do not treat simulation as a substitute for lived experience. Pushing a wheelchair for 20 minutes does not make a researcher an expert on disability. It can generate questions. Participants provide evidence. The eighth method is absence analysis. Interview people who do not use the route, service, or place. Ask what they expect would happen. Ask about earlier attempts. Ask what conditions would make the journey worth trying. The ninth method is before and after evaluation. When a curb ramp, crossing phase, shaded stop, route map, or protected lane changes, examine more than total users. Did the journey require fewer stops and negotiations? Did reliability improve? Did new groups appear? Did people travel at more varied times? Did independent travel replace accompanied travel? Did previously suppressed trips become visible? The 10th method is cumulative burden scoring, used cautiously. A scoring system can help compare routes by time, effort, uncertainty, and number of barriers. But the categories should not be collapsed too quickly into one universal number. 1 minute of waiting, 1 stare, and 1 hostile encounter are not naturally interchangeable units. Weighting differs across users and activities. The value of a score lies in making assumptions explicit, not pretending that a complicated life has finally surrendered to a spreadsheet. Several analytical mistakes should be avoided. The first is examining obstacles individually and declaring each one manageable. The relevant unit is the complete activity chain. The second is treating all burdens as additive. They may compound, trigger one another, or produce a weakest link failure. The third is measuring average conditions without measuring reliability. People plan around consequences, not only averages. The fourth is assuming completed trips prove accessibility. Completion may depend on pain, risk, informal help, or extraordinary preparation. The fifth is ignoring adaptation. Users often hide institutional failure by becoming highly competent at surviving it. The sixth is studying only present users. Those with the highest burden may already have withdrawn. The seventh is treating time as equal for everyone. Deadlines, caregiving, and employment conditions change the cost of delay. The eighth is treating cognitive, sensory, and social burdens as subjective extras after the real physical analysis. They are part of the journey. The ninth is assuming that removing all friction is desirable. Some friction protects vulnerable users or governs scarce public space. The 10th is celebrating resilience without asking why it was required. People's capacity to adapt is admirable. It is not a maintenance strategy. We can now return to the parent and the 1-kilometer journey. At each point, the earlier concepts remain visible. The blocked sidewalk changes the affordances of the route. It no longer affords continuous stroller passage. The pedestrian crossing is a behavior setting. Signals, markings, drivers, and waiting pedestrians organize a recurring sequence of action. The cafe terrace and parked car are territorial claims. They occupy space and force others to negotiate around them. Cumulative friction connects these encounters. It asks what happens after the parent has already rerouted, lifted, waited, scanned, negotiated, and boarded. It asks how much reserve remains. It asks what the person expects tomorrow. It asks whether the return journey still feels available. It asks whether the next trip will be made at all. The city often sees each incident as too small to matter. One illegally parked car, one missing ramp, one long signal, one unclear stop, one crowded bus. But behavior is shaped by the whole sequence. A journey does not fail only when movement becomes impossible. It also fails when completing it demands more time, attention, strength, uncertainty, dependence, or indignity than a person can repeatedly afford. This changes how we should understand mobility choice. People are not simply choosing between car, bus, bicycle, and walking as abstract modes. They are choosing between anticipated sequences of effort and control. They remember which sequence worked. They learn which failures can be repaired. They develop routines around the option that most reliably preserves their reserves, and when no option does, participation contracts. The final question is therefore not simply, can a person get from here to there? We must ask, how many times must they stop? What must they lift, remember, monitor, or negotiate? How predictable is the journey? What happens when one component fails? How much assistance is required? What burden remains on the return? Which users have already disappeared from view? And what valued activities become unreachable before movement becomes formally impossible? An inclusive city is not one in which every obstacle can somehow be overcome. It is one in which ordinary journeys do not demand extraordinary competence. It does not force people to spend their limited reserves compensating for preventable failures. It provides continuity where continuity expands freedom, and introduces friction where friction protects safety, fairness, and common life. It understands that a curb, a delay, a missing sign, and a hostile interaction do not remain separate inside the person who experiences them. They accumulate. Then they become expectations. Expectations become habits. Habits shape routes and modes, and routes and modes shape who can participate in the city. That is cumulative friction. The city is not only the distance between origin and destination, it is everything a person must overcome in between.